Thank you all for joining us for a riveting session. I'm personally very excited to hear Suzanne speak. We have Suzanne Wagner here today from Housing Innovations. Housing Innovations has been a contractor that we've worked with for many years. Kristin, for 10 years. They are one of the leading leaders in the country doing this work. They help us a lot with policy. They help us a lot with setting up our funding plan, writing those policies while we're scoring applications during the CoC funding process, etc. We're very, very grateful to be one of their clients and that they have been working with us for so long. And we're extra grateful to have Suzanne here with us today to walk us through what we anticipate with the upcoming NOFO. How many of you, before we get started, how many of you experienced some really fun, severe weather last night? Yeah. How many of you have heard of Ryan Hall, y'all? Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple. Thank you. If you haven't heard of Ryan Hall, y'all, he's a meteorologist on the YouTube. Y'all need to skedaddle over to his channel. That will all make sense when you get there. But he said repeatedly yesterday, all day yesterday, he just kept saying, "Don't scare, prepare. Don't scare, prepare." And we are in this room today because we don't scare, we prepare. Change is scary, right? But there's a lot of people in this room who have been doing this for over 10 years. Anybody over 10 years? Anybody over 15? Anybody over 20? Yeah, we've got people in this room who have gone through change after change after change. And here in the Balanced Estate, we do not scare, we prepare. So there's folks who have been through this and been through change, and we will get through it together. So without further ado, Suzanne, take us through it.
Thank you. Thank you, Meghann, and thanks, Kristin, and thanks to IHCDA for our long-term partnership between Housing Innovations and working together. It's really an honor to be here. I am based in New York City. Housing Innovations is spread out in a bunch of different cities, but it's my first trip to Indianapolis, and I've had an amazing time, and not even in 24 hours. So wait till I come back next time for 72 hours. So welcome, and this is don't scare, prepare. That's a good line. I like to use metaphors myself, and this is kind of a swan that turns into an airplane, right, through origami, the image here. And that's what we're talking about now, is how we make shifts to adjust to changes in the continuum of care NOFO. So that's what I'm going to focus on. We'll do a little background of what's been going on with the NOFO. I know it's been head spinning a little bit, so much activity, but yet no activity. It's kind of weird. What we do know about the NOFO for this year, what we can expect, we can't be 100% sure, and then how to prepare and questions and answers. So I will say the slides will be up. Feel free to use them. Hopefully they'll be helpful to you. There's a couple of links in there. Even though it says Q&A at the end, if you have a question during the presentation, I try to spell out all acronyms. I'll try not to talk all hard jargony on you, but if you have a clarifying question or comment, please raise your hand as we go through it. Okay? Everybody agree? Hello? 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 Okay. So we already mentioned I am a social worker. I'll just come out. I've worked in the homeless field and in programs for about the last 25 years. I've been working with communities all around the country. We support about 20 different states now, different continuums of care, different levels of support. So from rural to urban, from New York City to state of Nebraska Balanced Estate, and Montana Balanced Estate, which is probably the most rural. So we do have a bird's eye view on a lot of what's going on with different COCs and in the country. It has been a gift to us to work with you guys for 10 years. And before that, we worked with the city, with Rodney Stockman on HOPWA TA. And that's actually how we ended up getting connected with you. So we are deep. And my partner is Howard Birchman. He's the person you might have met before. And Howard could not be here today, but he sends his love and regards. So just to get a sense of who's in the room and give you a chance to move, because now I know it's the second session since breakfast, I want you to raise your hand as many times as is applicable for who is in the room, okay? So executive directors, all righty. Persons with lived experience of homelessness, okay, great, welcome. Agency administrator, all right, a few of you, we're all over the map. Program manager, okay, you're the biggest crowd so far, if we take a vote. Frontline staff, great, yay, welcome. I'm still a frontline staff worker in my heart, so that's where my heart is in that work, and that is really the work that gets the job done. Advocates, all right, everybody advocate, okay, everybody. Funder, any funders? Okay, raise your hands high, funders, so everybody knows. All right, government people, some of you fun. Oh, a lot of government folks, welcome, welcome. Business community, any business? Okay. Housing authority, yay, housing authorities, welcome, welcome. You guys are housing authorities, I guess. Street outreach, I know you have 11 teams. Transitional housing providers, okay, a few of that. Permanent supportive housing, oh, a lot of you, okay. Goes on and on. Rapid rehousing, a lot of you as well. Law enforcement, anybody from law enforcement? Yay, okay, welcome. Good partner. Universities, HMIS people, yay, data, right? Domestic violence agencies, okay, okay, we got a nice spread. Youth serving agencies, all right. Veterans, okay. All the way, raise your hand high, it'll help you'll feel better, you'll get endorphins from the movement, I promise you. Any others that and anybody else not get to raise their hand? Give a shout out. Everybody in one of those categories? Okay. Now, how long have you been in the field? I know that Meghann asked this, but I want to go we'll start at the beginning here. How many of you are less than a year in the field? Okay, a couple folks. Okay, welcome to the field, stay. 2 to 5 years. Okay. 6 to 10 years. All right, this is a very spread out group. 10 to 20 years. Okay, a lot of veterans, as I call veterans of the CoC NOFO. We've got the scars to prove it. More than 20 years. Okay, I'm in that bucket. Okay, well, great. It's good to have such a diversity in the room. It's also good for me to kind of get a sense, and it's good for you to raise your arms up and down and get the blood flowing in your body. We got to do things for self-care now, right? There's a lot of change, a lot of maybe some stress. So we've got to take care of ourselves. So just some background, and I apologize. You could read this, but maybe after the fourth row you can't. So again, the slides will be available. I'm not going to read them. But for about the last 20 years, homeless policy has been very steady. Since the HEART Act was passed in 2009, everybody knows the HEART Act, Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing, was passed in 2009. But even before that, HUD was moving in a direction for a lot of permanent housing, serving chronically homeless people, doing housing first. And that really has been the policy since the HEART Act passed. I'm going to talk about transitional housing this afternoon. The McKinney-Vento Act was originally passed in 1987. That's when the first big federal homeless money was available. So from 87 to 2009, we had a different set of things going on, including a lot of transitional housing, which I'm not going to talk about now, but I'll talk about later. And the priorities, as I said, housing first, chronically homeless. The new administration, which has been about almost a year and a half, has made some significant changes, some substantial changes in homeless policy that they've been putting out different information about over the I guess, again, the past 18 months. It's a little, the picture is like being a little confused with your head spinning. I don't know if you can see the picture because there's been a lot of action. I know I have it in 4 bullets, but we've had, in 2025, we had 2 NOFOs released, right? We had a few lawsuits, as well as CoC Build's lawsuit and 2 lawsuits related to the CoC NOFO. So there's been a lot of action. But those 2025 NOFOs that came out were basically rendered null and void by the court decisions, as was the CoC Build's NOFO. Did you guys apply for the CoC? I thought so. The CoC Build's NOFO. So that has now been determined to not be a legal NOFO, essentially, and what's going to happen, we don't know. What also happened very quietly a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if any of you noticed it, but there was a notice on, Howard would know the number, that's where he's better, 16-something, something, something. But there was a chronic homeless prioritization notice that was issued a few years ago to require that chronically homeless people be prioritized in your coordinated entry system. That notice is rescinded. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do that, but it removes the requirement, right? So it is a shift in practice. And then with all these NOFOs being released and all these court cases going on, at the same time, Congress was busy passing the HUD bill, which is a major bill that gets passed every year that funds HUD and a lot of other things. And this spring, early this spring, the HUD bill was passed and it required HUD to release funds from the 2025 NOFO if they did not get a NOFO out in time. And so there was a series of dates that were set out. So if you have a grant that expired in the first quarter of this year, does that apply to anybody? Another chance to get some endorphins? A few of you. Okay, yeah, do it. You can do it the whole time. Won't bother. That they have issued award notices and they've begun issuing contracts, right? Yes, for those of you Q1. Just since I put this PowerPoint in on Thursday, I think it was Thursday or Friday, they released the Q2 grant awards, right? So the requirement in the HUD bill was if they didn't have a NOFO out by April 1st, then they had to release the second quarter grants. So how many of you have grants expiring in the second quarter? Okay. Did you get notified? Yes? Okay, if you didn't, make sure you follow up. And the next part of that HUD bill is everything else that's expiring in Q3 and Q4 is to be renewed by July 1st. So it pretty much looks like at this point, I think we can say there is not going to be a 2025 NOFO. Okay, it's 4 months into 2026. That's the latest it's ever been. How many of you have been around? All you 20-year people remember being due on Memorial Day, the NOFO, yes? Memorial Day, that was the big date for years. It was due on Memorial Day, if you can believe it. And then we've moved later and later in the year over the years. And I think this is on my next slide. So I did cover all of this about what's happening with the money. Where is the money? Also big news, so everything that's in the top 4 bullets I already talked about. There was a grants.gov announcement last week, another quiet thing that didn't come out on the HUD listserv. If you were wondering, how come I didn't see that there was a CoC NOFO announcement for 2026? And lo and behold, the links are live in here, so when you get the slides, you can click on it, but you can Google it, it'll come right up. And it says that the NOFO for 2026 will be issued on, so sorry about the summer, people, issued on May 29th and due August 26th. So much for that summer fun you were going to have, right? Be a lot of work to be doing. And this NOFO, just so everybody knows, the 2026 NOFO is for grants that expire in 2027. Some of you may not even have renewals yet, so you don't even have a 2027 expiration. But once your grants are renewed this year, if they're going to expire in 2027, then you have to apply this year. Okay. And the HUD representatives have been having meetings around the country. I understand they have not come here yet, that they may join you, representatives from HUD to share the administration's priorities and share information from HUD about what's to expect coming up. And they have stated publicly that the 2026 NOFO is going to be substantially the same as what they issued on December 19th, 2025. So that's a lot of information. So we've had a lot of time during the year where we didn't quite know where things were going. Permanent housing was to be cut to one third, right? Everybody knows about that. There still are probably reductions to be had in permanent housing, so do not think that's gone away, but there's been a lot of unknowns. But now we know a lot more, so we can prepare. Don't scare, prepare. We didn't even practice that. I don't even know who that guy is, but I'm going to look him up. And for those of you who want to, having trouble sleeping, like to read 137-page RFPs, there is a link to the 2025 NOFO, the one that was released in December, so you can go and look at that. And I recommend you go and look at that so that you can be prepared. You'll get a sense of what's coming. It is not fun reading, some things you could skip, but you should look at the scoring, you should look at the priorities and those kinds of things. But I'm going to go over some of that. Let me pause for a minute, I'm talking a lot. Any questions? Clear as a bell or clear as mud? Which one? Mud, little muddy, okay.
More clarity than we've had in a while.
Yeah, yes. So let's be grateful for little things. We do have a lot more information than we've had before. So what do we know? Which is a perfect segue. Me and Meghann, we're ready to go on the road with this show. So what do we know? We know from the NOFOs that there's a shift away from housing first and a shift away from permanent housing. And an emphasis on rebuilding the transitional housing inventory. How many of you provided transitional housing?
Well, back when it was a...
Yeah, how many of you did it before and are doing it now? Let's just get a sense. Okay, both. Okay. So some people in the room may not have ever been around when transitional housing, I think Kristin said 2024 was the last conversion of transitional housing
program.
Yeah. So there's a cap on permanent housing in that NOFO of 30% of the money you're entitled to no more than 30% can go for permanent housing renewals. So permanent housing, as HUD defines it, is permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. Yes, I know. I'm sorry. Again, I don't work for HUD, Housing Innovations, Housing Innovation. So that's been a struggle, and I know you guys have talked about it, because I talked with Howard, I talked with Kristin and Meghann before we came, but in many communities it means a reduction in permanent housing, because most people are really spending the vast majority of their funds on permanent housing. So that's pretty complicated. There's a prioritization on treatment and recovery. So helping people get access to substance use and mental health treatment, medical treatment, and engaging in recovery programs and recovery practices. And including that, making supportive services required. Supportive services have been voluntary, right, in the Housing First model. Voluntary for the participants, but not for staff, I always say, right? Staff has to do a lot of assertive engagement to make that work. But it's very clear, and we'll see when I talk about scoring and other things, that this is really an expectation that pretty much all COC programs are going to have to make supportive services a requirement of participation in the program for a variety of reasons, and I'll explain some of those. It may conflict with VAWA if you're a DV provider. VAWA specifically says you can't require participation in services, so you don't have to comply. They did correct that. Between NOFO 1 and NOFO 2, they realized that it was a conflict. The guidance was a conflict. I will say, just as a social worker and a practitioner, and I'm looking at a room full of people who know how to do the work, and I've worked in mandated services. How many of you have worked in places where services are mandatory, required? Okay. It doesn't mean that people come to the well, but they may not be drinking. Right, and ultimately, what? Well, we might be drinking. Right. Recording in progress. Recording in progress. But even in a mandated relationship with people, they need to engage with us around a goal plan that we're working on with them. And that has to happen because they find a reason to engage with you. Anybody can do time. Yeah, I'll meet with Kristin. Sure, I got a monthly case management visit. We could sit there and talk about nothing for 30 minutes. So mandatory services doesn't mean everybody just engages. We don't have that magic bullet, right? We still have to work to engage people. So I just put that out. I also put out, I don't think any of us came to this work to evict people for not meeting with their case manager. And depending on your state, like I'm from New York State, no judge is going to evict someone who didn't meet with their case manager. They're going to evict someone who maybe is creating a health and safety hazard, hasn't paid their rent, is disturbing their neighbors, and in some other way violating the lease. But I don't think any of us want to be discharging people because they won't meet with their case manager, right? That's not what we're here for. And so I say that because I'm doing a little bit of advocacy around how you spend time thinking about how are you going to handle it if somebody doesn't engage in services? What additional engagement strategies you're going to use? How are you use maybe your coordinated access network or other providers to figure out how you might engage somebody? Or would they do better in a different program? Do they need something different? Can we have a case? I noticed you have case conferencing here, right? Using case conferencing might be a great place to have some conversations about what to do, what strategies might we use to engage people. So that's a thing we need to think about, right? Because it is going to be a requirement. There's also in the NOFO a requirement to provide 40 hours per week of customized services for each participant. We need a lot more detail on this. That's about all the detail there is. It is reduced if you're employed, although I don't know how you're going to get employed if you're in services all day, so that's going to be a little bit of a challenge because another priority is employment income. But there is a plan, and we're creating tools at Housing Innovations. We actually kind of created a schedule of a 40-hour week, and we'll be sharing everything so you guys can use it and share it. Another priority is to reduce unsheltered homelessness. So this has been a priority for a long time, so this is not new. So this we know about, and you guys have 11 new outreach teams, right? I just heard that during that CoHoot thing, which is my first CoHoot. But that is a priority. Other things from the NOFO, promoting self-sufficiency by increasing employment income and accessing unsubsidized housing is specifically, I hear some giggling, okay. I know why, because it is tough, right, for people to make it and pay their own rent without a subsidy. So, and it's also tough, I don't know what the minimum wage is in your state, but in a lot of, what?
$7.25.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you afford an apartment? Yes, can you afford an apartment with work 40 hours of that? Maybe you need to do 80.
122 hours a week.
Okay, yeah, more hours than there are in a week. Okay, all right. So that's going to be tough. We may want to look at shared housing. We may want to think about rooms for rent. We may want to think about other kinds of, and then of course using other resources. One thing we do know is we have a lot more seniors in the homeless population. So can we access, even though it's still subsidized, elderly programs, senior and elderly 202 programs that might be there. Also partnering with law enforcement and first responders to advance public safety, law enforcement in the room. I think many people do partner with law enforcement already to do outreach, to identify unsheltered people, to address people who are cycling through being arrested for minor crimes and coming in and out of the shelter system. So that's an important priority. No safe use, no safe consumption sites. That is a key requirement in the NOFO. People have to address whether they allow illicit, I'm trying to choose my right words, illicit drug use on their facility or property they own. And that includes also needle exchange. So safe use, which I don't know that you have safe use here. Needle exchange, maybe. You do have needle exchange, yes, yeah.
Would the naloxone box be considered?
Naloxone, no, because it's not illegal. It's not illegal, okay? It is helping people not die from an overdose, but it is not an illegal drug. You could use naloxone.
Okay.
Yeah, and we actually just created a Q&A, which we'll again share with you on what are the prohibitions on safe use, et cetera, et cetera. But one continuum we work with, and I don't have to keep it a secret, at City of Burlington, Vermont, they actually have a safe injection site at City Hall, and they're the collaborative applicant.
What?
They have a safe injection site in City Hall in Burlington, Vermont. Burlington is a college town, if you don't know that, very, very liberal, and the city is the applicant for the COC. So they're having to switch applicants, right? Because they're not closing the safe injection. So anyway, just a few quick stories. Anyway, other things, treatment, incarceration, and containment for people who do not accept services. This is coming out of the executive order on crime and disorder. If you have not read that, that is not happy reading, but really there is provisions in there to create ways to involuntarily detain people who are not engaging in treatment and may be a danger to themselves or others. And that's clear preference also for some of those homeless campuses type of things, which you might have heard about. The other thing that HUD has talked about in meetings, but they haven't put it in writing, is they want to reintroduce competition into the NOFO. This 95% renewals that Tier 1 is, do people know what Tier 1 is? Tier 1 is the money that's protected, pretty much, as long as you submit a good application. It was at 95% for the last few years, which meant everybody pretty much got renewed. Well, they don't want to do that. They want to set Tier 1 at something like 30% and get everything else to be new. Now, there's been work in Congress. There's a lot of advocacy around this. We're not sure how it's going to come out in this NOFO about what Tier 1 will be, but they do want to continue to make more competition. So not automatic renewals. They also said that the data on the AHAR, the Annual Homeless Assessment Report, and the SPMs that's been being provided to Congress is inaccurate and needs to be recalculated. And the reason that the AHAR is late this year is because they're recalculating the numbers. That's all I have. A little scary. Bringing in more faith-based groups, I think that's a no-brainer. In most communities, the faith-based groups are already at the table. In most communities we work with. And then this is another one, is rebalancing the system to 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and that lacks detail. 1/3 shelter, 1/3 transitional housing, and 1/3 permanent housing. I love evidence-based practice. I love science. I love numbers. I love projecting need in communities. We do a lot of work like that, of figuring out how many units of housing people need to address homelessness in their community. And there is no magic 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. There's not science behind that. So, but that is an intended plan of the future.
Can you repeat the 1/3, 1/3?
Yeah, sure. 1/3 shelter, 1/3 transitional housing, 1/3 permanent housing. Okay. Other questions on the policy priorities? Okay. A couple of other things. So what should we expect when the NOFO comes out? All of those things I think will probably be there that I just went over. We also know from the 2025 NOFO, they changed the cap. It was permanent housing. All permanent housing was capped at 30%. Now permanent housing renewals are capped at 30%. For most communities, that doesn't really mean any changes because they weren't going to apply for new funding when the first NOFO came out for permanent housing, right? Just in case you wondered what's in permanent housing, it is permanent supportive, rapid, and TH. And the cap only applies to renewal projects, not new. So then, with these priorities, in the December NOFO, there was a set aside of 1/3 of the $4 billion, which is $1.25, $1.3 billion. So let me say that, $1.3 billion, big bucks, was set aside for new permanent housing projects. Getting dizzy? No, I'm right down the path here. So the Hearth Act requires that 1/3 of the funds be spent on permanent housing, so they did that to comply with the Hearth Act on new permanent housing. So they made a set aside, but it will be permanent housing, but only for disabled people. So rapid rehousing is permanent housing, right? Rapid rehousing doesn't always serve disabled people, and in fact serves a lot of non-disabled people. So I know you're getting excited about that permanent housing money and applying for it. It will be for disabled only, and so, just think about that. Got to think about that. So we expect a similar menu when the new NOFO comes out. I see a couple of faces. Yeah.
Can you?
Don't sit on it. You can bring, I'm a social worker, it's okay.
Can you give us a description of actually what they are considering to be disabled?
Well, there's a HUD definition of disability. They did make some indications in the first NOFO that they were not talking about substance use, which is clearly under the HUD definition of disability. They seem to have backtracked from that and gone back to the HUD definition of disability. So a HUD definition of disability is very broad. It's a physical, mental, or emotional impairment expected to be of long-standing duration that affects a person's ability to live independently and manage their housing. So right now it's still very broad, but we may see some priorities. Seniors may become a priority. I think they realize there's a lot of substance users, and if you exclude substance use, you're leaving all these people unserved. So again, there's been more thinking as the year has gone on about that stuff. This is for the geeks in the room who want to know how the points all break down. It's 130 points. So you guys individually submit individual applications. Kristin and Meghann and her team submit a CoC application, which is the bulk of what determines your likelihood of getting funded. So that's the score that affects a lot of other things. So this is an important thing. And you can read how they broke down the scores. It's 130 points. But you can see there's some big points for decreasing the number of homeless people, 17 points. So that's more than 10%, right? 60 points for treatment and recovery, 10 points for requiring participation in services, 13 points for protecting public safety, and working with law enforcement to address people who may be camping illegally or living illegally on the streets and so on. Okay. My alarm is coming off because I'm supposed to be done in 1 minute. So I'm just going to say one other thing about the points is 1/3 of the points is for SPMs. I'm going to break it down a little differently from this slide. So of the 130, 1/3 comes from those SPMs, your systems performance measures. So that's exits to homelessness, earned income, permanent housing, length of time homeless, and numbers. 1/3 is for compliance with the executive order on crime and disorder, treatment and recovery, and the supportive services requirement. So that's 1/3 of the points really relating very closely to those policy priorities. Okay, just a couple of more points and I really want to open it to questions. This was in the 2025 NOFO, is that there's going to be an expanded project risk review for any application, new or renewal. So this is everybody. Any project may be rejected, again, by HUD for using a definition of sex other than binary, engaging in racial preferences, operating safe injection sites, or distributing drug paraphernalia, inability to produce positive outcomes or results, and then a history of activities that conflict with the goals of the NOFO. And this actually makes reference to social media posts and other things that your organization may have put up on the web that may be seen to be in conflict with the current policy priorities. So action, evaluate your social media presence, evaluate your website. You know, I know people are in all different places with this of how much they're going to change and what they're not, but better to prepare than be scared and know if you are going to remove it or not, right? Think about it, internally discuss what you're going to do in your agencies. Okay. Other ways to prepare, now I'm going to jump into prepare and then I'll wrap it up. Employment services, very important. Something in general the homeless world is C- on, I'll just have to say. Not everywhere, some places are better than others. I will say that. I will call out Texas because they do amazing stuff with employment. I can't say why, but they probably because there's not many benefits you can get. But look at your performance on employment. Look at this. Make connections with your job centers, et cetera, et cetera. Learn about non-COC housing resources. I know there are probably very few. You probably know what exists in your community, but maybe you don't. Just make sure you know about everything. Connect with substance use providers. I know there are substance use providers here because I met some of you already in my brief visit, but also, creating some MOUs, agreements for services if you are serving a substance using population. One of the things that HUD has put out is on-site substance use treatment in 30% of projects they would like to see. So you will help your COC get more points. Look at your services and make sure you have enough services in your programs. HUD has indicated that they think there are not enough services to do the job we need to do. So here's some good news. So make sure, especially if you're going to do a transition grant, some of you might transition from rapid to transitional housing or permanent supportive housing to transitional. That's an opportunity to redo the budget and make sure you're adequately getting services. And for those of you who've been around the table for a long time, here we go, swing one way, swing the other way. For years, HUD didn't want to pay for services, so he took all the services money out. Now HUD wants to pay for services because they realize people need services. So make sure when you're doing this, and that they are looking for services to be about 30% of your total COC application for a community.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's quoted there, it's very small, but you'll read it later. Other things, think about the service participation requirements, I already mentioned that. Think that through really how you're gonna handle that. Consider whether you could convert. Some of you might have already figured out whether you should convert to transitional housing. Again, you have to do 40 hours a week of programming. There will probably be new funds for permanent housing, so think about if you want to do a new project. Okay, it's going to be 100% disabled. This state, you do development, which we love. Maybe you have a site, maybe you have an idea. Review your agency's public-facing information, I already said that. And then just some really technical, make sure you're in eSnaps. Is everybody in eSnaps? Has everybody checked their eSnaps? Who's in eSnaps? Who knows for sure they're good?
If you're a sub-recipient, you're good.
Okay.
We got you.
For the ones, right, because here about half of the applications go in through IHCDA, so they have to do their eSnaps. And again, their applicant profile. And then, don't do this alone, plan together. We're all in this together. We're trying to come out with the best possible outcome on the other side for the clients, right? That's the goal. And I think when I always think about what do we do when we have hard decisions to make, we think about what's going to give us the best outcome for the work we're trying to do with people, right? And that's where we're going to stick. And in the event that some things might cause harm to people, which some things in these policies might, we are looking to minimize or reduce the harm that people experience, right? So work together and, everybody, one breath, take one breath. I know I need to after that presentation. Let it out. One more, and that's your limit for the day. Okay. All right. So a couple minutes over on covering that, but there was a lot to jam in. 10 minutes left. So we have this 10 minutes for you guys for questions, and I see your hand up already, so.
Just have a question about housing first. Is that something that we should scrub from our policies?
Yeah, we're using language like housing forward, housing focused case management, housing based case management, like if it's in shelter, transitional housing focused case management, and then in permanent housing, housing based case management, housing forward policies and procedures. If you think about AI, which, it's not what this session is about, but it's everywhere, things can be easily searched by keywords. So look at that language carefully. I didn't even spell it out on the slide. I put HF, right? Not that we've rejected the principles or practices because they're science-based. So, but how do we do that in a way that reiterates the principles and practices that are right. And I think, I'll just say a word about Housing First, because I think what has been acknowledged in a lot of public forums I've been in the last year is that Housing First has not been done with fidelity, if you will. And people have been, it's become housing only or anything goes, right? People are not held to standard tenancy expectations, and that has given all of Housing First a bad name. And when we train on it, we talk about, it can't be low barrier and low expectations. It's low barrier, but high expectations. We expect that we're going to support people to follow the lease. And there have been a lot of programs that have allowed, and I'm not saying in Indiana, but around the country where people have had no requirements at all. And then that word gets around, and people are like, we're giving you 100% rent subsidy for nothing, right? And you're not even, and you're creating a criminal situation, or you're not paying the rent, or things like that. And unsafe things have gone on, I'll just say that. So there is an acknowledgement that we need to take a look at our programs and make sure we are doing things the best way possible. So thanks for that question. Yeah.
Have you seen any other national guidance that's providing resources about what does the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 look like? Like, we're just so removed from the shelter information from the NOFO or from TH programs. I know you're going to talk about TH, but what do those mean, and how can we shift? And especially if they're giving 30% to services, like, that's unheard of in our world, because we've been really adamant about focusing on housing. So are there other people teaching us what to do? Like, how do we learn?
So that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 literally came out of the blue at one of these, public forums that Robert Marbit has been doing.
Yeah.
So it was just off the cuff. We haven't seen anything in writing about that. I think for a lot of communities that is not going to make sense. If we think about transitional housing and what happens in transitional housing, people stay 2 years, right? So how does that work, the 1/3 and then the 1/3? I don't think there's a lot of science behind it, and I don't know of any guidance, and it was just put out. But the other thing is the ESG money is not enough to fund 1/3 of the system as shelter, right? I was surprised to hear how many ESG grantees you have, because ESG is still a small pot of money.
And with 100% match.
Yes, and with 100% match, right. So sorry I can't give you more advice on that. I think what I take that to mean is that there's going to be an emphasis on funding transitional housing, right? That's what that means for the COC, because we can't fund shelter with the, COC funding. So,
But we can do SSO. So support
yes,
services
only for shelters, they could be, yeah. Good questions, yeah.
Can we elaborate a little bit on what is the pre-test for the NOFA?
I'm gonna do that. Certainly.
Okay, that's a Meghann question.
Great transition. That question was totally planted. Thank you. So as part of our Don't Scare, Prepare, pushing out this knowledge, and one of the other items that we are doing right now is we just released a pre-test. So that pre-test is kind of just a benchmark setting. For those of you who are current grantees and thinking about renewing, as well as if there's people in your community that are thinking about a new project, or if your organization is thinking about a new project, that pre-test is going to walk through some of the things that we saw on that FY25 NOFO that we anticipate will also be on the 2026 NOFO. And it gives you an idea of what will be up against in June, or this summer, I should say. So a big chunk of it is the SPMs, or system performance measures. As Suzanne mentioned, that's going to be about 1/3 of the score. And so for those of you who are current grantees, really dig into your data, run your APRs, run your SPMs. If anyone was in the last session in this room, Daniela and Brendan just ran a great session on pulling up reports in a new HUD tool called AVA. And that even allows you to go down to like the client level. It'll spit out a client ID and say like, this person's exit needs to be fixed. get in there, dig through HMIS, make sure when you do run that SPM report, by the time the internal application comes out this summer, that your score is looking really good. So that pretest is just kind of to give you a benchmark of where you are currently. We will not post scores publicly. We're not like sending out of if the competition was tomorrow, here's how everyone ranks. We're not going to do that. We are going to send you your score, and we are going to do like the quartiles. So like you're in the top 25%, you're in the bottom 25%. So this also can inform you of, hey, if the competition was tomorrow, and you're scoring really, really low, and you have a permanent housing project, we need to talk about, converting your project to transitional or applying in a new project. Again, doing as much as we can to prepare.
Thank you.
So direct HUD recipients should also take this pretest?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Anyone who's currently funded or wants to be funded in the future.
And Meghann, and you believe that you guys have the capacity, or maybe with Howard and Suzanne's help, to help us understand how to transition programs? If I have a PSH project that, when people leave, they're either dead or they're going to jail, so I can't really do well on my employment outcomes. So how do I switch that to a TH project? Like, you'll help me understand how I do that?
Yes, Suzanne has a couple more slides on that that we will share with everyone.
Yeah, I think I actually left them in the presentation of
Yeah.
like what the transition grant process looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there going to be any technical assistance to help with transitioning LIHTC projects? I mean, or is it even possible to transfer LIHTC projects that are PSH to transitional housing?
So you're not going to be able to move a LIHTC project from a PSH to a transitional housing. So we probably need to look at a service-based model, because that's going to get you in trouble with the LIHTC regulations.
In some communities that we work in, LIHTC projects were kind of carved out as long as they were performing to get into that 30% set aside for permanent housing, that there is, not set aside for new project, the 30% cap on permanent housing renewals. In some communities we worked in, there's been a prioritization of site-based projects like LIHTC projects that will fundamentally become unsustainable if they lose the subsidies.
Yeah.
So that may be something to consider when you're, as a community, making your decisions about what do we preserve in that 30%. There have been transitional housing projects and LIHTC projects, I'm just going to say that out loud, but they don't like that. That's not what they want it to be.
Will DD bonus still have to apply as a group to whatever, either rapid or make that transition that we transition?
Yeah, we've gotten this question a lot. So let's talk. I think we need to talk, I've talked to a couple of folks who have the DV award individually, and I think the next step is to talk as a group and determine. And I think once those pre-test scores come back, we have more of an idea of where everybody's going to be at.
And there was a DV money in the last NOFO, so.
Yes, and we are out of time, but one more question.
Hi, thank you for this seminar, it's very helpful. 30% of services, I just want to hit on that, 30%, okay? So, third of. So for our transitioning program, one of the jobs is we have to make sure that they're permanently housed and that they get employment, right? If they're able and not disabled. So what our organization actually did was went out to the community, like Hard Rock Casino, Home Depot, different companies that would hire veterans or that favor veterans, and got a partnership collaboration with them, that if we train them and we have an online platform that we get them certificates through, are you willing to partner with us to hire those veterans? And so we were able to get, that partnership from 4 different companies. So that actually gave us the employment piece. And then we have the suicide prevention, the wellness, the peer support, the SUD, education and employment. And I think we partnered, yeah, that's about it, and the foundation of group so. And NIPSCO, or NiSource. They're both the same people.
We all need your name and email.
Exactly.
Oh, but I mean, does that kind of encompass,
That's a great solution. And again, I love ending on this because as scary as the change is, there are solutions.
Yep.
And it stinks that, you know, we're not going to be laying by the pool this summer unless maybe we also have our laptops beside us. But those are the solutions that we need to talk through together and think about. Finding your local America's Job Centers. They already have employment coaches who are full-time and can work with your folks. That's one less case manager you have to pay. Things like that. They're solutions to these changes, and we'll get through it together.
Absolutely.
Enjoy lunch.